Welcome to the Private Lenders Podcast with your host from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the show. Today we are discussing cyber fraud and wire fraud and what we have to do as private lenders to prevent that from happening. We have a few different things we're going to go through, a few examples, a few stories. Real quick first before we get started, we have our next Inner Circle meeting in May in Dallas. If you would like to join us and 25 or 30 other private lenders from around the US, go check out Hard Money Mastermind, innercircle.com to make application. All right. So who wants to go first?
Well, cyber fraud's not going anywhere, and it's getting worse and worse. And we've been hit by it, unfortunately, I think just once in the past. And it, wasn't obviously major, but we've definitely, caught, a few different attempts to defraud us either through wires or faulty checks or faulty ACH payments or things like that. So we actually, have a good amount of steps in place that we were going to discuss, go through some of the stories that of kind of what the outcomes were. And, every hard money lender, every private lender has to be aware of this and make sure you're not just being aware, but you're taking appropriate actions. And at the end of this video, we're going to go through the steps that we do and the things that we have in place with our staff, I should say, to make sure that we do whatever we can to prevent this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you notice when you're communicating with title companies about a closing or a payoff or something, they all have it on their email signature that make sure that you verbally verify wire instructions. Cyber fraud is increasing. It's 100% true. This stuff is out there. Hackers and other people are getting better and smarter, unfortunately. And there are things that we have to put in place that we're going to talk about here in a second. So the one time that cyber fraud slipped through on us was a situation a few years ago. And it just so happened, I don't know if this is a coincidence, I think it's a coincidence, that Jason and I were in LA at the time. We had some business meetings going on. We were hanging out with a few business friends. We were playing golf. It was winter around here, so getting out to LA for a week or so in January, February, whenever that was, is obviously a good time. And during this time, our controller was getting emails from what looked like Jason's email address, asking her to cut a check and to FedEx it to an address. And when we look back, we could tell. At first glance, it looked like it was Jason's sending emails. But if you looked more closely at it, you could tell that some things were off, right? The way the person was writing, email signature or lack thereof, there are some things that looked off, but it was enough to trick our controller. And I believe the amount was $9,000. Cut a check from this account. And she even asked, wait, should I make it from this account or that account? And they said, oh, from this one. And she's like, okay. And at the time, for only kind of emergency use, like in this case, when we were out of town, she had a stamp. She had a stamp with a signature that you could sign checks. We don't have that in place anymore. It has to be signed by either me or Jason. But at the time, she had a stamp. She cut the check, stamped it, put it in the FedEx, and sent it to this address, and that $9,000 was gone, right? Not the worst hit in the world, but certainly not something that you ever want to have happen. And she kind of carried that. She's not with our company anymore, but she carried that with her for a long time. A mistake that she made, she got tricked, and she kind of never got over it. And around the time she was leaving the company, she was even still mentioning it years later, but that's kind of besides the point. But that's just one little example about how hackers can make fake emails and get your people to do something you're not supposed to do.
Yeah, and that wasn't the reason that she left the company. She retired. So it wasn't that.
She didn't, she didn't leave the company.
It was an honest mistake. And when you look back, there was warnings. There was definitely signs that should have been caught, but you never know, right? She got a panicked email that says, hey, I really need to get this. You probably got these emails from scammers all the time, right? Hey, I really need to get this, or call me with this, or do this, or do that. So, lesson learned. Typically when you get an email from somebody that looks like it could be fake, fraudulent, you're unsure about, like click on the top of the email to see the actual full email address. Because, like, for instance, if I send you an email, it's going to say Jason Balin, my name on it. But if you actually click on it, you'll see what the email address is, right? And a lot of the times it'll have the person's name as, as the vanity, but then the email address is like whatever, blah, 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 something fake. That's not them.
Right.
Oh, and also, double check their lingo and things like that. So, and this was, I know you said a couple years ago, but that was a while ago. I mean, 8 years ago. It was a long time ago. That was also before, like right now, like most everything we do is ACH, incoming and outgoing. So it's very rare. There's just not that many checks as before. So back in the day when there was a lot of investor checks and there was things like that, used a stamp and if we were out of town or something like that to make it cleaner.
You want to talk about the most recent one? Because we had one that was even scarier and only happened within the past like 2 months.
Yeah. So there's been, I would say, lots of times in the past where scammers are looking like their intercompany emails going back and forth. Like, hey, send me this, send me that. Like, in order to trigger a conversation, it's like, yeah, something seems weird about this. So like that happens pretty regular, and in essence, they're spam. And on the previous one, like we called, local authorities on that one that we had a loss for, and they came in and gave a statement. Unfortunately, the money's gone. There's not really anything they're going to be able to do with it, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. The most recent one that was scary was, this is what happened. Title company requested a payoff statement from us, and on our payoff statement, it's pre-populated through the mortgage office, right? So on the payoff statement, it shows all the payoff information that's owed plus our bank account that we need to, our wiring instructions, I should say, at the bottom of that. So we sent that to them. Someone in our office, our controller sent that to them normally. They called our office to verify wire instructions, and we did verify the wire instructions. And the deal didn't end up closing. Well, they asked for a new payoff statement. I don't know, a few weeks later, because the deal didn't close, and the payoff was expired. So they asked for new payoff statements. I don't believe that we sent them the new payoff statement. Maybe we did. I don't remember if we sent them a new payoff statement or not, but they called to verify wire instructions. And usually, it goes to somebody else in my office, like our portfolio manager, Terry, or something, but they couldn't get a hold of her. So they talked to me, and I verified wire instruction. And I'm like, wait a second, this isn't our wire. Can you send me that payoff statement? And she forwarded me the payoff statement. It was our exact payoff statement, except the banking information. The wire information was the fraudster's wire information, not ours. Red flag that immediately. I'm like, look whose email that came from. Look at all this stuff. And in essence, it came from Vanity email, our controller. That's what it said the name was. But it actually, when they looked at the email and they opened up the actual email address, it wasn't her email address. It was someone claiming to be her. So that one got scary.
That one got scary. Mind you, that one was more on the title company because it was them sending money. And if we don't receive it, obviously, we're not releasing the lien. We haven't been paid. So that would have been on them, but still a scary one, right? And just the fact that somebody can send a fake email that really looks like it's from your company, nothing, and they had a copy somehow of the payoff statement. All they did was change the banking information. Pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, anyone can send, and really anyone can send an email on behalf of any name, right? I could just create a Gmail account that has Chris Haddon's name on it.
Sure.
It could be like I could change in my email server. It could be my email address, and I can change my name to Chris Haddon, and then I can send an email out, and it could say Chris Haddon on it, and they don't even know. So, you got to be careful on some of that stuff.
Yeah. So let's run through a couple of the checks that we have in place to try to prevent this.
Yeah.
If I miss any, let me know. So one, obviously verbally verify wire instructions for any wire being sent. If it's to a title company, if it's to your own borrower, because you're giving a construction draw, If it's, unless the same wire instructions have been in place forever, like even sending money back to one of your capital investors, same thing. If there's any kind of change, unless it's the same, bank information for the past 5 years, right? Another one that we have that popped up last year as well is that you got to realize when you're sending out payoff statements all the time, which all of us private lenders are, you're giving your bank info to the whole real estate world, right? Just like you would, like if you sent a check, like you pay your bill, like not that many people pay bills by checks anymore, but like you could pay your, say, electricity bill with a check. You're in essence giving your routing number and account number to anybody along the path, right? And even more so when you're emailing out payoff statements to many parties, title companies, borrowers, whoever it might be. So something that started happening last year that we had to nip in the bud was we started getting some fraudulent checks and ACH transactions hit our escrow account. And the bank reached out and they're like, this seems funny. You don't normally send ACHs in this way. Like we only do ACHs that we enter ourselves, right? Whether it's a batch going out, like what we're doing today for a weekly outgoing ACH payment, or pulling funds, or an individual ACH transaction entered by our company into our online banking. We don't have anything else external hitting our account. And we only send a handful of checks a month, but we started getting fraudulent stuff like, somebody's paying their AT&T bill from our escrow account via ACH, which somebody can do. If they have your bank account info, they just enter it into wherever they're trying to make a payment. It's going to pull from your account. And so the bank flagged it. They hit us up around the same time. We had some fraudulent checks try to get deposited, thousands of dollars. And so we put, and you can do this too, we put an ACH block in what they call check positive pay onto our account. Every bank provides this so that anytime a check comes through for payment, you can either approve it or decline it. And, coincidentally, since that happened, like the fraud kind of stopped. Like I've had maybe one transaction fraudulent since we put these things in place that I had to decline, but still it's good to have it there. ACH block, check positive pay. That's, something you might as well do, even if it hasn't hit quite yet, because it's going to save you some trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do before we ACH funds out or wire any funds out for a construction draw to a borrower or to a title company is we have a few steps in place. When we share wire instructions internally as a team, we don't email them back and forth to each other. We actually upload them onto our Google server, our Google Drive, and then that can only be seen internally by whoever we share that item with.
Yeah, share the document instead of email it.
Exactly. So let's say I wanted to share an item with Chris. Instead of me emailing it to him, I'll just upload it to our Google Drive and I'll send him the secured, private link just through that. So he'll be able to access it. The way we have it set up is our portfolio manager shares that with our controller. Our controller manually inputs the wire into the bank, and we get notified, and then Chris or myself will go in to approve the transaction if it's an ACH or a wire. And before the wire gets inputted, Terry in our office also calls the title company or the recipient of it, and verifies the wire instructions to make sure that there's that they're still good to go on that. And like Chris mentioned earlier, if anyone changes wire instructions kind of last minute, like that's a big red flag. Like send them to this instead, send them to this as well. So, like if you have, doing construction draws for your borrowers, and one time they email you and say, hey, can you send it to this person instead, or send it to this instead, or this instead? You got to verify that by picking up the phone and potentially calling them and making sure you're talking to the right person. I mean, we've heard stories where people have verified wire instructions and they called the wrong person. There's title companies that when they call us to verify wire instructions, they won't email us to tell us to call them. They have to call our main phone number that's listed on the website to talk to us directly, right? So they have different things in place. I mean, a lot of these things could potentially be, the title companies, obviously take a lot of risk when it comes to that. They're sending lots of wires to new parties, multiple people per transaction. So, they typically have good checks and balances in place to follow.
Yeah. And then the final thing we have in place is, so we have in essence what's an E&O policy, which is not easy to get as a private lender because of the lack of regulation in this industry and, licensing and all that stuff. In case anyone does, I know people in the mastermind ask about this. If anyone does want the contact for the person we use for our E&O and cyber policy, you can email me, chris@hardmoneybankers.com. I'll put you in touch with them, no problem at all. But mind you, this policy we have to jump through some hoops. We have to give them a lot of financial information, and it's expensive. It's an expensive policy. And then a rider to that E&O policy, even if you didn't want the full, errors and omission stuff, you could probably just get a cyber fraud policy to use, in case all that other stuff happens and you end up, wiring a couple $100K to the wrong place and it disappears. You can get a policy for that. So we have a cyber fraud policy in case, we don't catch something and it's like a last resort kind of thing. I'm sure the deductible's high. It's the kind of thing that you never want to use. You never want to be in a position where you have to use that. But it's there. It's there, as a fail safe, cover your ass kind of just in case sort of policy. So those are the different things that we have in place. I hope that you guys are being very, very careful out there when sending money around electronically. Hopefully you benefited from a couple of the stories we told. Hopefully you don't have any cautionary tales of your own. We appreciate you guys checking out the podcast. We'll see you here next time and inside hardmoneymastermind.com.
See you guys.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.